Hi, this is John again, the owner and developer of VectorDecks. In this tutorial we're going to go over the beam settings from within the frame's SunDeck settings button. So let's go ahead and get to that settings menu. Click on the frame, and in its object information palette you're going to click on SunDeck settings. It'll bring up a window with the sub options, so we're going to go ahead and click on beams. You'll be presented with a sample here of the beam as it is in the drawing. Now it's not going to be the full beam. Some of the beams are very long in length with multiple posts. I just abbreviated and made a small sample of how it appears in the drawing itself. By default the beam is always set to not be trimmed out. It's also textures or finish has the pressure treated look to it. And also by default you have a 6x6 as your post and 2x10s as the framing material for the beam itself. Now the beam is a fairly simple component of the SunDeck. There's not a lot of parts. You're going to have the beam portion itself. It'll generally consist of a 2x member, usually 2, and 2x8, 2x10, 2x12. And a post. I have either 6x6 or 4x4. But what you can change, I'll have those appear in these windows. One more three-dimensional with its color or its textures rendered, and then a front view and a side view. Now this is not how the beam is actually in your drawing. I just can't fit sometimes very large beams in this tiny window. It draws itself so small. So what I did here is just make sort of an example, a shorter version of how the changes to your beam would appear. Now let's get into some of those changes you can make here. You could change your beam to either 2x8. You'll see how things change in those different windows. Or you could make your post 4x4 instead of 6x6. These are fairly obvious. Now this post set-in is the distance from the outside edge of your beam to that outside edge of your post, and it's on both sides. So if you wanted to make that, let's say 16 inches, now sometimes after entering it you won't see any change. I added this apply changes button. It won't apply it to your document. It's only going to apply it to these views and these windows. You could also change the beam quantity. I have 2 here. You can either increase it, or you could make it 1 if you want. The defaults are somewhat typical, but you have these changes that you can apply to the different framing portions of the beam. A thing to note with respect to the post set-in, if you do change the set-in, it may change how many posts are involved in your actual drawing. I'm going to set that back to 16 inches. For example, here you'll see in the background here I have your actual drawing. You have on this front beam, you have 5 posts. That distance is based on what you have as far as post on center set to in your beam tool setting. But if you change that distance from the outside edge, the math could change how many posts are involved. I believe it does on this particular drawing. So I'm going to leave that to 16. The other changes you can make are cosmetic changes to the beam. Now you can trim that beam out. You just click on that trim beam and post. I'm going to change these finishes to white and finish the post in white also. So it has that wrapped, trimmed out beam look to it. You could turn that cap wrapping extra trim off, or even the post cap, you can turn that off. But this is some of the typical trimmed out looks to the beams when you want to finish it more than just the framing. Now I'm going to go back to the drawing, but you can always hit cancel, and that would cancel all these different settings and just revert to the default that's on the drawing. But we're going to click OK. Now if you noticed, there was 5 posts across here. Now there's 4. And they also equally span them. It'll adjust the spans in these because you moved the distance in. The other thing to note that if you're in a 2D environment, this is not drawn in 3D, you won't see a whole lot of changes in the beam appearance here. But once you click on Draw 3D, I have the frame selected and I'm going to go ahead and click on Draw 3D, you're going to see things change a bit. Everything gets drawn in 3D and the beams themselves are now trimmed out. Let's get a better look at this by rotating it so we can see the bottom. There we go. See, now all the beams are trimmed out to how we specified in that menu. Let me deselect this so it's a little more visible. There you go. So it finished everything the way it's supposed to. It moved the posts in, it decreased one post. There's a lot of things that happen when you are able to make the beam changes in the frame settings, so you don't have to manually go into each beam and make those changes. Now the next thing we'll go over at the next tutorial, select that beam again, in the Sundex settings, is lattice. And we'll show you all the different options you have in this particular window.